The woman's fingers trembled against the rough wool, clutching it so tight her knuckles had gone white as bone. Blood seeped through the fabric in dark patches, spreading slow and steady like spilled wine on Sunday cloth. Her eyes, wild, desperate, never left Jake Millicent's weathered face as he stood in the doorway of the abandoned cabin, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Please," she whispered again, voice cracking like dry leather. "Don't look under the blanket." 3 hours earlier, Jake had been riding the northern fence line of the Double Bar Ranch when thunder split the sky open. The storm came fast and mean, the kind that turned creek beds into rivers and sent cattle running for shelter. He'd spotted the cabin through sheets of rain, a forgotten homestead from the early days, when dreamers still believed this harsh land could be tamed with hope and hard work. The door had been hanging open, creaking in the wind like a broken promise. That's when he'd seen her, a woman in a torn blue dress, huddled in the corner beside something covered by that blood-stained blanket. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair plastered to her skull and eyes that held the kind of fear that goes bone deep. Jake had seen plenty in his 43 years. War, drought, men driven to madness by solitude and sun. But something about the way she protected that blanket, the way she positioned herself between him and whatever lay beneath, made his gut clench tight. "Ma'am," he said, voice gentle as he could manage. "You're hurt. Let me help." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. If anyone sees." Her voice broke completely then, dissolving into sobs that shook her whole frame. The cabin felt smaller with each passing second. Rain hammered the roof like bullets, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, long, mournful, lonely. Jake's horse nickered nervously outside, sensing something wrong in the air. He took a step closer, boots creaking on the warped floorboards. The woman's breathing quickened, panic rising in her throat like flood water. Whatever was under that blanket had put that terror in her eyes, had driven her to this godforsaken place in the middle of nowhere. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward the blanket's edge, and the woman let out a sound, half scream, half prayer. But it was too late. His fingers had already found the wool, and something deep in his chest told him that once he lifted it, nothing would ever be the same. Jake's hand froze inches from the blanket. The woman's breathing came in short, desperate gasps, and in the dim light filtering through the cracked window, he could see tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-stained cheeks. "My name's Jake Millicent," he said, settling back on his heels. "I work the Double Bar, about 10 miles south. Whatever's under there, maybe you should tell me first." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, judgment, maybe, or the kind of hardness that came with too many years in an unforgiving land. But Jake had learned patience from horses and cattle, from watching storms build on the horizon and knowing when to wait them out. "Sarah," she finally whispered. "Sarah Caldwell." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Every man within 100 miles knew about Sarah Caldwell, the banker's daughter from Willow Creek who'd vanished 3 months ago on her wedding day. The posters were still nailed to every hitching post and saloon wall from here to Santa Fe. $500 reward, no questions asked. "Your father's been looking for you," Jake said carefully. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "He can't, no one can know what happened. What I did." Thunder crashed overhead, closer now, and the cabin seemed to shrink around them. Jake had found missing people before. Most times they were running from debts or bad marriages or the law. But Sarah Caldwell was different. She was supposed to marry Judge Morrison's son, a union that would have tied together two of the most powerful families in the territory. "Sometimes a man's got to make choices," Jake said. "Sometimes those choices ain't easy ones." Sarah's grip on the blanket tightened. "You don't understand. There's blood on my hands. Real blood. And if my father finds out, if the judge finds out." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Jake heard the words anyway. Hanging. Prison. Disgrace that would follow her family for generations. Outside, his horse whinnied, sharp, alarmed. Jake's head snapped toward the door, every instinct screaming danger. Through the rain, he could hear something else now. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving fast despite the storm. Sarah heard them too. Her face went pale as creek stone, and her whole body began to shake. They found me, she breathed. Oh God, they found me. Jake moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. 3 riders, maybe 4, their shapes blurred by rain and distance. But even through the storm, he could make out the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. He turned back to Sarah, and the look in her eyes nearly broke his heart. She was trapped, caught between whatever terrible secret lay under that blanket and the law riding hard toward them through the storm. In minutes, maybe seconds, those riders would reach the cabin. And Jake Millerson would have to choose between justice and mercy, between duty and compassion. The hoofbeats grew louder, splashing through mud and standing water, closing the distance with every heartbeat. The riders reined up outside with a sound like thunder rolling across the plains. Jake counted 4 silhouettes through the rain-streaked window, 3 deputies and Sheriff Tom Brennan, a man who wore his badge like armor and his righteousness like a loaded gun. Sarah Caldwell! Brennan's voice cut through the storm like an axe through kindling. We know you're in there, girl. Come out peaceful, and nobody gets hurt. Sarah's whole body convulsed with terror. She pressed herself deeper into the corner, still clutching that blood-stained blanket like it was the last solid thing in a world gone liquid with fear. Her lips moved in what might have been prayer or might have been curses. Jake couldn't tell which. There's a back way out, he whispered, nodding toward a boarded-up doorframe on the cabin's far wall. Boards are rotted through. You could know. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet, sudden and surprising. I'm done running. Outside, leather creaked as the men dismounted. Boot heels rang against the wooden porch, and Jake could hear the soft click of hammers being drawn back on revolvers. These weren't men who'd come to talk. 30 seconds, Miss Caldwell! Brennan called out. Then we're coming in. Jake's mind raced. He'd known Tom Brennan for 15 years, had respected him as a lawman who tried to do right by folks. But Brennan answered to Judge Morrison, and the judge's boy was supposed to marry Sarah Caldwell. Political marriages in this territory weren't just about love, they were about power, about water rights and land deals and the kind of money that could buy elections. What's under the blanket, Sarah? Jake asked, his voice barely above a breath. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the fear gave way to something else, defiance, maybe, or the kind of desperate courage that came when a person had nothing left to lose. Justice, she whispered. The word hung in the air between them like smoke from a dying fire. Jake felt something shift in his chest, some fundamental understanding clicking into place. Whatever Sarah Caldwell had done, whatever blood she'd spilled, she believed it was right. And looking into her eyes, eyes that held pain but not shame, terror but not guilt, Jake found himself believing it too. 20 seconds! Sarah's hand moved to the blanket's edge. If you're going to look, she said, look now. Before they break down that door and decide my fate for me. Jake knelt beside her, his calloused fingers joining hers on the rough wool. The fabric felt warm, sticky with blood that hadn't quite dried. Whatever lay beneath had been human once, had breathed and walked and made choices just like everyone else. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and bent nails. Sheriff Brennan filled the doorframe, his Colt .45 drawn and ready, 3 deputies flanking him with rifles raised. Rain streamed off their slickers, and their eyes held the cold certainty of men who'd already decided how this story would end. Step away from her, Millerson, Brennan ordered. This doesn't concern you. But Jake's fingers were already lifting the blanket, and Sarah's hand was guiding his, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, everything changed. Beneath the blanket lay Thomas Morrison, the judge's son, Sarah's intended husband, but not as Jake had expected to see him. The young man's face was peaceful, almost serene, but his throat had been opened in a clean, precise line. No struggle. No defense wounds. Just one perfect cut that had ended a life as quick as blowing out a candle. But it wasn't the body that made Jake's blood run cold. It was what lay beside it, a leather journal, its pages stiff with dried blood, filled with careful handwriting that documented 3 years of systematic horror. Names, dates, locations. Girls who'd gone missing from remote homesteads. Children who'd vanished while playing near creek beds. All in Thomas Morrison's neat, educated script. "Sweet Jesus," Jake breathed. Sarah's voice came out steady now, stronger than it had been since he'd found her. "He was going to make me disappear too. After the wedding, after he'd used me up like he used up all the others. But I found his journal first. I found out what kind of monster I was supposed to marry." Sheriff Brennan stepped into the cabin, water dripping from his hat brim. His eyes took in the scene, the body, the journal, the blood, and Jake saw something die in the lawman's face. Not surprise. Recognition. "You knew," Sarah said, and it wasn't a question. "You knew what he was, and you were going to let him marry me anyway." Brennan's jaw worked like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. "The Morrison family has been good to this county. Judge Morrison is a fair man, an honest man. His son—" The sheriff's voice trailed off, and he holstered his weapon with movements that seemed to age him 10 years. "His son was a killer," Jake said, standing slowly. The journal felt heavy in his hands, weighted with the truth of 24 lives cut short. "And you knew it." One of the deputies shifted nervously. "Sheriff? What do we do?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Outside, the storm was beginning to break, thunder moving off toward the eastern hills. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called, clear, sweet, innocent, the kind of sound that belonged to a world where monsters didn't wear human faces and good men didn't have to choose between law and justice. Brennan looked at Sarah for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her blood-stained hands, the way she held herself like someone who'd stared into hell and found the strength to climb back out. "The official story," he said finally, "is that Thomas Morrison died in a riding accident. Horse spooked in the storm, threw him against some rocks. Tragic loss for a prominent family." Relief flooded Sarah's face, but Jake saw the sheriff wasn't finished. "Unofficially," Brennan continued, his voice harder now, "Sarah Caldwell died in this storm too. Swept away by flood waters while trying to reach shelter. Body never recovered." The words hit Jake like cold water. Sarah's hand found his arm, fingers digging in with desperate strength. She understood what Brennan was offering: life, but not the life she'd known. Freedom, but only if she became someone else entirely. "I can't go home," she whispered, and Jake heard all the grief in the world packed into those 4 words. 6 months later, Jake Millerson rode the fence line of the Double Bar Ranch as the sun set red and gold over the western peaks. The work was the same: checking posts, counting cattle, watching for signs of wolves or rustlers, but everything else had changed. The woman who called herself Mary now worked in the kitchen at the boarding house in Millfield, 3 towns over. She'd cut her dark hair short and learned to speak with a slight drawl that disguised the educated cadence of her banker's daughter upbringing. Nobody asked too many questions about a widow woman trying to make an honest living, especially one who kept to herself and didn't cause trouble. Judge Morrison had aged 20 years and 6 months. The official story held: his son had died in a tragic accident, and the missing Caldwell girl had been claimed by the same storm. But Jake had seen the judge's eyes at Thomas's funeral, had recognized the haunted look of a man who suspected the truth but couldn't bear to face it. The journal had disappeared into Sheriff Brennan's safe, along with the questions nobody wanted answered. Jake reined up beside the creek where he'd first met Mary, where Sarah Caldwell had died and been reborn as someone simpler, cleaner. She was waiting for him in the shade of a cottonwood tree, wearing a plain brown dress and a hat that cast shadows across features that had grown stronger over the months. "Any trouble today?" she asked as he dismounted. "None worth mentioning." They walked along the creek bank in comfortable silence, listening to the water run over stones worn smooth by time and current. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of forgiveness. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. "Letting me live?" Jake considered the question as he'd considered it every day for 6 months. In his saddlebags was a letter from Sarah's father, still searching for his lost daughter, still offering that $500 reward. Money that could buy a lot of comfort for a working cowboy. "I've seen enough death," he said finally. "Sometimes mercy's worth more than justice." She nodded, understanding passing between them like water between cupped hands. They'd both chosen to carry the weight of truth rather than the comfort of law, and it had changed them in ways that couldn't be undone. As full darkness settled over the valley, Jake helped Mary up onto his horse. She rode behind him toward the lights of Millfield, her arms around his waist, her presence warm against his back. Tomorrow would bring the same choices, the same quiet compromises between what was legal and what was right. But tonight, in the space between heartbeats, they had found something like peace. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth, carrying them toward whatever uncertain future waited in the darkness ahead.